What's up, everybody? Good evening. Like Robbie said, I'm Brooke. I'm a member of 1DC here in DC, and for my wage work, I work for the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights doing fair housing work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of courts as a site of struggle, part two. Denise earlier was giving y'all some sort of substantive information about how to, move when you're in housing court, so to speak, or about to go. And what I'm going to talk about is really sort of like putting housing court into context as part of, the system of racial capitalism that it oppresses us. Can I move these slides, or I think we're ready for the next slide? In other sessions, we have defined white supremacy. So I just wanted to bring us back to those definitions so that we could think about white supremacy. It's a political ideology that perpetuates and maintains the social, political, historical, and institutional domination by white people, and it does that through interconnected systems of control that are designed to advantage whites and to subjugate non-whites. And landlord-tenant court is as much one of those systems as the criminal courts are, and it operates on people of color in very similar ways. So we can go on to the next slide. So, courts are used to essentially preserve white supremacy. So black people, and depending on where you are, I think like nationally a little bit to a lesser extent, Latinx people are overrepresented as defendants or respondents in just about every area of the legal system. And, once you go beyond Black and Latinx people to just say like BIPOC people, then you're, in the high, you're 90% of, the civil and legal court systems with respect to individuals. So I think that, we hear a lot about the criminal legal system, but it's also the civil legal system. You go to landlord-tenant court and look around and you'll see, brown people. The same thing in traffic court and other, other sort of just about any court you go into. We can go on to the next slide. So, I think that lately, especially, we've been talking a lot about how Black folks are overrepresented in the criminal legal system. And I've just, raised up some statistics that we've used in our fair housing work in the past few years. And they're really striking. African-American, males are, imprisoned at, over 6 times the rate of white males. 1 in 3 Black men will go to jail in their lifetime compared to 1 in 20 whites. And just looking at DC, 80% of arrests are of Black folks who are whereas we only make up 50% of the population. And I think that, across the country, Latinx people might be imprisoned at lower rates than African Americans, but at much higher rates than whites. So we can move on to the next slide. And then, Black and other, people of color are overrepresented in eviction filings. So there's a few studies that are relatively new, like a couple of them are sort of in response to the COVID crisis, and then some are a little bit older, but that look at, the overrepresentation of, people of color in eviction filings. And for example, there's a study that just looked at the state of Washington that found that, Black and Latinx people were evicted at rates, 7 times higher than whites. So like that looks a lot like that, the arrest figure from the other slide, where it was talking about, the disparities. And then there's, 78% of eviction cases in Boston are filed in minority neighborhoods. And then in Minneapolis, a study that looked at, where filings happen in Minneapolis, they found that they were concentrated in, minority neighborhoods. And I think that Matthew Desmond, who wrote the book Eviction, talks about this as well in his research. So it's well documented that, people of color are evicted at a disproportionate rate. So just like criminal justice, or criminal legal system, not justice, is, some of the figures and things we talk about, the disparities there, and that's a racial justice issue. Evictions are really a huge racial justice issue as well. So that's just to sort of put, landlord-tenant court, like I said earlier, in context as, a system of oppression that is, used by racial capitalism to oppress brown folks. And organizing can sort of, through organizing, we can use the courts to often, support our people who are showing up for eviction filings, or, who are otherwise, dragged into court and to be, oppressed and held to account. But we can also use the courts to go on the offensive. And I think that we can go to the next slide now. So a strong organizing campaign can, help you to use the courts in an offensive way. So in the work that we do, or the work that I do in DC, oftentimes with One DC, we struggle with tenant groups who are facing, discriminatory redevelopments that are going to displace them. We have used, fair housing lawsuits to, challenge the plans, and without a strong organizing campaign to sort of, bring the tenants together and sort of really, tell the attorneys, what to do and what the facts are of the situation, cases like that, really aren't possible. And then also sometimes lawyers are able to win some sort of big court decision, but it doesn't mean anything on the ground unless there's a strong organizing campaign to make it mean something. And, there's lots of examples of this over the years, but sort of like the maybe quintessential example is like Brown v. Board, which, they didn't start to, they didn't start to integrate schools until 10 years after that decision came down, when people started to, have a strong, organizing campaign and sort of were building pressure and power. So sometimes you need the organizing campaign to make the court decision mean something. And sometimes you need the organizing campaign just to get into court. But courts certainly can be used as, a place to, struggle from an offensive standpoint, as well as a defensive standpoint. So I'm seeing in the chat that I should slow down, but that's like sort of as I've already talked fast throughout. So I'm here, I can answer questions, but that's, really, I'm just about done. There are, examples of organizing where, organizing has, like I said, both made cases possible and made court decisions meaningful.